Oh, it's getting tense. Or at least getting very drunk. The Mouser stood up and came over. He rolled back one of Fafhrds's eyelids, gave a satisfied nod, then gave another after feeling Fafhrds's pulse, which was surging with as slow and strong a rhythm as the breakers of the outer sea. Meanwhile, the Mouser's other hand, operating with an habitual deftness and artistry unnecessary under the circumstances, abstracted from a fold in Fafhrds's loincloth a gleaming gold object he had earlier glimpsed there. He tucked it away in the secret pocket in the skirt of his gray tunic. Someone coughed behind him. It was such a deliberate-sounding cough that the Mouser did not leap or start, but only turned around without changing the planting of his feet in a movement slow and sinuous as that of a ceremonial dancer in the Temple of the Snake. Pulg was standing in the inner doorway, wearing the black and silver striped robe and cowl of a masker and holding a black, jewel-spangled vizard a little aside from his face. He was looking at the Mouser enigmatically. "I didn't think you could do it, son, but you did," he said softly. "You patch your credit with me at a wise time. Ho, Wiggin! Quatch! Ho, Grilly!" 3 henchmen glided into the room behind Pulg, all garbed in garments as somberly gay as their masters. The first 2 were stocky men, but the third was as slim as a weasel and shorter than the Mouser, at whom he glared with guarded and rivalrous venom. The first 2 were armed with small crossbows and short swords, but the third had no weapon in view. "You have the cords, Quatch?" Pulg continued. He pointed at Fafhrd. "Then bind me this man to the bed. See that you secure well his brawny arms." "He's safer unbound," the Mouser started to say, but Pulg cut in on him with, "Easy, son. You're still running this job, but I'm going to be looking over your shoulder. Yes, and I'm going to be revising your plan as you go along, changing any detail I choose. Good training for you. Any competent lieutenant should be able to operate under the eyes of his general, yes, even when other subordinates are listening in on the reprimands. We'll call it a test." The Mouser was alarmed and puzzled. There was something about Pulg's behavior he did not at all understand, something discordant, as if a secret struggle were going on inside the master extortioner. He was not obviously drunk, yet his piggy eyes had a strange gleam. He seemed almost fey. "How have I forfeited your trust?" the Mouser asked sharply. Pulg grinned skewily. "Son, I'm ashamed of you," he said. "High Priestess Ilala told me the full story of the Black Sloop, how you sublet it from the treasure in return for allowing him to keep the pearl tiara and stomacher, how you had Urf the Mingo sail it to another dock. Ilala got mad at the treasurer because he went cold on her or scared and wouldn't give her the black gewgaws. That's why she came to me. To cap it, your Lily Black spilled the same story to Grilly here, whom she favors. Well, son?" The Mouser folded his arms, threw back his head. "You yourself said the split was sufficient," he told Pulg. "We can always use another sloop." Pulg laughed low and rather long. "Don't get me wrong, son," he said at last. "I like my lieutenants to be the sort of men who'd want a bolt hole handy. I'd suspect their brains if they didn't. I want them to be the sort of men who worry a lot about their precious skins, but only after worrying about my hide first. Don't fret, son. We'll get along, I think. Quatch, is he bound yet?" The 2 burlier henchmen who had hooked their crossbows to their belts were well along with their job. Tight loops of rope at chest, waist, and knees bound Fafhrd to the bed, while his wrists had been drawn up level with the top of his head and tightly laced to the sides of the bed. Fafhrd still snored peacefully on his back. He had stirred a little and groaned when his hand had been drawn away from the bottle under the bed, but that was all. Wiggin was preparing to bind the northerner's ankles, but Pulg signed it was enough. "Grilly," Pulg called, "your razor." The weasel-like henchman seemed merely to wave his hand past his chest, and lo, there was a gleaming, square-headed blade in it. He smiled as he moved towards Fafhrds's naked ankles. He caressed the thick tendons under them and looked pleadingly at Pulg. Pulg was watching the Mouser narrowly. The Mouser felt an unbearable tension stiffening him. He must do something. He raised the back of his hand to his mouth and yawned. Pulg pointed at Fafhrds's other end. "Grilly," he repeated. "Shave me this man. De-beard and de-mane him. Shave him like an egg." Then he leaned toward the Mouser and said in a sort of slack-mouthed, confidential way, "I've heard of these barbs that draws their strength. Think you so? No matter, we'll see." Slashing of a lusty man's head and face hair and then shaving him close takes considerable time, even when the barber is as shudderingly swift, as Grilly, and as heedless of the dim and flickering light. Time enough for the Mouser to assess the situation 17 different ways and still not find its ultimate key. One thing shone through from every angle: the irrationality of Pulg's behavior. Spilling secrets, accusing a lieutenant in front of his henchmen, proposing an idiot test, wearing grotesque holiday clothes, binding a dead man, dead drunk. And now this superstitious nonsense of shaving Fafhrd. Why, it was as if Pulg were fey indeed, performing some eerie ritual under the demented guise of shrewd tactics. And there was one thing the Mouser was certain of: that when Pulg got through being fey or drugged or whatever it was, he would never again trust any of the men who had been through the experience with him, including, most particularly, the Mouser. It was a sad conclusion to admit that his hard-bought security was now worthless, yet it was a realistic one, and Mouser perforce came to it. So, even while he had continued to puzzle, the small man in gray congratulated himself in having bargained himself so disastrously into possession of the black sloop. A bolt hole might soon be handy indeed, and he doubted whether Pulg had discovered where Ulf had concealed the craft. Meanwhile, he must expect treachery from Pulg at every step, and death from Pulg's henchmen at their master's unpredictable whim. So, the Mouser decided that the less they, Grilly in particular, were in a position to do the Mouser or anyone damage, the better. Pulg was laughing again. "Why, he looks like a new-hatched babe!" the master extortioner exclaimed. "Good work, Grilly!" Fafhrd did indeed look startlingly youthful, without any hair above that on his chest, in a way far more like what most people think an acolyte should look. He might even have appeared romantically handsome, except that Grilly, in perhaps an excess of zeal, had also shorn naked his eyebrows, which had the effect of making Fafhrds's head, very pale under the vanished hair, seem like a marble bust set atop a living body. Pulg continued to chuckle. "Had no spot of blood, no, not one. That is the best of omens. Grilly, I love you." That was true enough, too. In spite of his demonic speed, Grilly had not once nicked Fafhrds's face or head. Doubtless a man thwarted of the opportunity to hamstring another would scorn the lesser cutting, indeed consider it a blot in his own character, so the Mouser guessed. Gazing at his shorn friend, the Mouser felt almost inclined to laugh himself, yet this impulse, along with his lively fear of his own and Fafhrds's safety, was momentarily swallowed up in the feeling that something about this whole business was very wrong. Wrong, not only by any ordinary standards, but also in a deeply occult sense. This stripping of Fafhrd, this shaving of him, this binding of him to the rickety narrow bed. Wrong, wrong, wrong. Once again, it occurred to him, more strongly this time, that Pulg was unknowingly performing an eldritch ritual. "Hist!" Pulg said, grazing a finger. The Mouser obediently listened along with the three henchmen and their master. The ordinary noises outside had diminished for a moment, almost ceased. Then, through the curtained doorway and the red-lit louvers, came the raspy, high voice of Boisdress beginning the long litany and the mumbling sigh of the crowd's response. Pulg clapped the Mouser hard on the shoulder. "He is about it! 'Tis time!" he cried. "Command us! We will see, son, how well you have planned. Remember, I will be watching over your shoulder, and that it is my desire that you strike at the end of Boisdress' sermon when the collection is taken." He frowned at Grilly, Wigan, and Quatch. "Obey this, my lieutenant," he warned sternly. "Jump at his least command, save when I countermand. Come on, son, hurry up, start giving orders. The Mouser would like to punch Pog in the middle of the jeweled vizard, with the extortioner just now again lifting to his face. Punch his fat nose and fly this madhouse of commandings. But there was Fafhrd to be considered. Stripped, shaved, bound, dead drunk, immeasurably helpless. The Mouser contented himself with starting through the outer door and motioning the henchman and Pog too to follow him, hardly to his surprise, for it was difficult to decide what behavior would have been surprising under the circumstances. They obeyed him. He signed Grilly to hold the curtain aside for the others. Glancing back over the smaller man's shoulder, he saw Quatch, last to leave, dip to blow out the taper, and under cover of that movement snag the 2/3 full bottle of wine from under the edge of the bed and lug it along with him. And for some reason, that innocently thievish act struck the Mouser as being the most occultly wrong thing of all, the supernally off-key events that had been occurring recently. He wished there were some god in whom he had real trust, so he could pray to him for enlightenment and guidance in the ocean of inexplicably strange intuitions engulfing him. But unfortunately for the Mouser, there was no such divinity. So there was nothing for it but to plunge all by himself into that strange ocean and take his chances, do without calculation whatever the inspiration of the moment moved him to do. So while Broadress keened and rasped through the long litany against the sighing responses of the crowd, an uncommonly large number of catcalls and boos, the Mouser was very busy indeed, helping prepare the setting and place the characters for a drama of which he did not know more than scraps of the plot. The many shadows were his friends in this. He could slip almost invisibly from one shielding darkness to another, and he had the trays of half the hawkers in Lankhmar as a source of stage properties. Among other things, he insisted on personally inspecting the weapons of Quetch and Wigan, the short swords in their sheaths, the small crossbows, and the quivers of tiny quarrels that were their ammunition, most wicked-looking short arrows. By the time the long litany had reached to its wailing conclusion, the stage was set, though exactly when and where and how the curtain would rise, and who would be the audience and who the players, remained uncertain. At all events, it was an impressive scene, the long street of gods stretching off toward a colorful, torch-lit doll's world of distance in either direction, low clouds racing overhead, faint ribbons of mist gliding in from the great salt marsh, the rumble of far-distant thunder, bleat and growl of priests and gods other than Isaac, squealing laughter of women and children, leather-lunged calling of hawkers and news slaves, odor of incense curling from temples, mingling with the oily aroma of fried foods on hawkers' trays, the reek of smoking torches, and the musk and flower smells of gaudy ladies. I'm going to stop it there. I don't know what's going to happen. Actually, I do.